was actually out here in the Valley from 99 to 03 with Intel Capital when I did a lot of enterprise software investing, some of the early consumer web, and then moved back east and was with a couple funds there. One is New Venture Partners, which commercialized technology out of corporate labs. So went into labs and like IBM, Philips, British Telecom, Intel, and would go in and look at orphaned technology. You know, a lot of these corporates at least used to have these huge research organizations, but wouldn't necessarily commercialize it all on their own. And so this fund was created to incubate and kind of create business plans around some of this technology. So very much acted as co-founders with the technologists, and we'd incubate for 6 to 12 months internally, and then make an assessment on whether to spin out and get other funding. And then after that, I was with the New York City Investment Fund.
It's probably feeling like you are, you know, like I don't want to do it.
It's with the New York City Investment Fund, which is an economic development fund started by Henry Kravis, who was one of the founders of KKR, and Steve Schwartzman and Barry Diller. And I ran the venture investments there, which kind of fed the returns for some of the lower return, like true economic development work that we did. And part of the mandate, part of the mandate there was, well, it's like a purple filter.
Yeah, really?
It's like an Instagram.
Yeah, it's an Instagram slide.
Anyway, part of the mandate of the New York City Investment Fund was to seed the ecosystem there, and we're seeing you know, a lot of that around the world. I was just in Jordan talking about that and meeting with, we actually met with the king there, and you mentioned the president of Poland is also very interested in technology, and you know, I think it's something we're seeing all around the world. But from 2007 to 2010, I started a seed fund in New York. I did some direct investing. Kind of created liaisons between the Bloomberg administration and the VC community and the universities, which are all, you know, very important components of building an ecosystem there. And now it's, you know, thriving. It's rivaling Silicon Valley. You know, it's they've actually, New York is the only region that's actually seen more venture investing over like the last few years, and the only one in the U.S. So it's been very successful, some of the things we put in place there. And after, you know, being in the industry for a while, seeing several cycles, I decided to start a fund for some of the gaps that I see out there in the VC space. And one of the big ones is a global outlook. I was born in Nairobi. I'm Indian. I grew up, you know, going to the emerging markets, and have been investing. You know, when I was at Intel, I did one of Intel's largest deals in India that later IPO'd. And so I just think there's tremendous potential, and so part of the fund will be investing in non-US startups, but also help US startups access some of these markets.
Sorry? What's the problem?
We had, somebody had another one? Another one, yeah, the one that was there originally didn't work. But thanks, we're there. I'm not trouble now.
Sorry about this.
Okay. No problem. So anyway, so that will lead me into the presentation. And you know, we have a very international crew here, so I want to keep this interactive too, and get your thoughts as you know, we move through this presentation. But you know, the concept is that there's, you know, Silicon Valley no longer has a monopoly on innovation. And I mean, it never really did, but now we have connectivity and the ability to find startups, you know, all over the world that are addressing not only local markets, but can access, you know, markets beyond their borders. So I think this is a very exciting time to be investing, and I personally would like to see more diversity, you know, amongst investors, more global outlook, and that's one of the reasons that I'm starting this fund. So, I mean, I talked about this a little bit. Silicon Valley is where it used to be at, and now, you know, we're seeing certain ecosystems around the world that are innovating or leapfrogging Silicon Valley. And, you know, this woman in Africa with a mobile phone, and I've spent a lot of time in Africa. I didn't mention in my introduction, I was also with Omidyar Network in 2010 for a year, helping them put together their mobile strategy and investing in emerging markets. So I was spent a lot of time in East Africa, India, did a deal in Mexico, was in Brazil, and really saw the potential when I was doing that. So, and then I'm going to just go through 3 sectors that I think are particularly interesting globally. You know, there's innovation happening in different countries in e-money, e-commerce, and healthcare, and by no means are, you know, is it limited to these 3, but these are the ones that I see as being, you know, universally growing across all of these geographies that we're going to talk about. So the world, the world population. I mean, the gist of this slide is that we know that China and India, you know, have these huge populations. Right now, you know, U.S. is 3rd, Indonesia is 4th, and then Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Russia, and Japan. The forecast for 2050 is that India is going to overtake China and overall population China because of the one-child mandate that they had for so many years is actually going to have an aging population in the future. So not just because I'm Indian, but I think India is a tremendous market with a lot of potential, just given you know, a lot of factors. I mean, one is the growth, and it's also primarily an English language market, or you know, that's that's one of the national languages along with Hindi. But you can see that, so the top 4 stay the same, but you have Nigeria coming in, you know, in the 5th position. And then you also see Brazil appearing on this. And then you can see, I mean, we'll get to this, but both Russia and Japan are going to be losing population. And I know we have some, you know, Russian in the house, but so it's, you know, I think for some of those places, there, and I'd say especially Russia, right, is known for a lot of technical talent, can actually innovate, but you know, innovate for global markets. So I don't know how easy this is to read on the screen, but so population growth, and this goes with what we were saying before. The red areas are going to have the most population growth, you know, the next 50 years. The dark green areas, so most of them are in Africa, are next, and then you know, the ones that pay attention to are Europe, you know, Russia, as I mentioned, which are going to have negative population growth. This is just to get a sense of where, you know, the bulk of the population is going to be, the bulk of the consumers down the road.
Is there going to be an issue in China with the fact that they kill so many girl babies? Because I just noticed in the Valley there's so many male Chinese PhD students,
right,
but hardly ever see women, and I thought, gee, it must be like a lonely sort of place in China, because they got rid of so many girls.
But what's been and you know, there are implications for marriage.
Yeah, they have to go to
right,
Hong Kong and Taiwan to get women and Philippines.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's definitely been issues around that. But then I've also noticed that the women are actually very much equals. They're the ones that survived. You know, it's and that's, you know, I have to say also, when I was just in Jordan, which, you know, I didn't expect that there were at least as many women entrepreneurs in every room as there were men.
Right.
And that's just not something you see in the U.S.
Yeah, exactly. Good work.
And then the median age is also, something to pay attention to as we look at future, workforce and growth in consumers. And Africa is a youthful population. They range from 14 to 20. So the dark green, which is here, is the 14 to 20, and then we work our way up. India, India's kind of in the middle, but you can see that the U.S. is aging, and as is China, as is Russia. Then GDP growth. This follows very much along the lines of the overall population growth, but we see slowing. And this is from 2011. I'd say that the statistics in Europe are probably much more dire at this point. But we're seeing India and China and some of the Middle East and Africa and parts of Latin America showing the most potential for growth down the road.
So even though Australia didn't have a recession, what growth?
Yeah, and I think it has all these factors come together. When you have a youthful population that's producing versus kind of taking from the system, and my argument is that we are going to have to rethink retirement and utilize the potential of folks who are older, because that can be actually one of our great competitive advantages.
Strengths,
right?
Yeah.
So let's look at the web. The U.S. only accounts for 10% of global internet users right now. 500 million users in India and China, and those two countries alone will add 700 million more by 2015. And if you look at the implications for revenue, they're going to be creating over 80 billion in commerce, access fees and different revenue around this growth. And when I was at Omidyar investing in mobile, it was really fascinating to see how mobile has really transformed and helped create GDP growth. And I think the World Bank study a few years ago showed that every 10 percentage point increase in mobile phone penetration yields an extra 0.8 percentage points of annual economic growth. So there's a direct link. It's that connectivity that's allowed people, and there's so many stories, there are farmers that can then access information about weather patterns and or kind of world prices around different crops, and then they can decide when to sell because they have this increased information and then increase their revenue. We'll talk a little bit about M-Pesa in Kenya, which is their mobile money system, but it's just fascinating that these entrepreneurs that only had like one business, because of M-Pesa and ability to transact in different places, can run many more businesses and not have to be physically present everywhere. So the mobile phone's really been a game changer for all this global growth that we're seeing. And then the other interesting thing is that while there's a lot happening in the U.S. around innovation, there are other regions in the world that are leading innovation in different areas. So, if you look at gaming and virtual goods, China and Japan have innovated a lot, and they've created new usage models around those sectors. And then Indonesia in social networking. It's an inherently social culture where they're much more active on social networks than even the U.S. And then I'll add Jordan, since I was just there. The Middle East are big media consumers because there just aren't as many cinemas and other outlets. So it's online media consumers, and I saw some incredible statistics on kind of YouTube usage, and they're one of the largest in the world, that region, around YouTube usage. So I just think any entrepreneurs, or as an investor, when I'm looking at the potential of a particular business, it's important to think about what markets outside, and you guys are not necessarily all in the US, but outside of your home markets, could this technology be applied to? So I talked a little bit about this, but the social, this is a global social network penetration. And the global average is here. And US is close to the global average. The Philippines, so this, the left axis is the percentage of active online users that are using social networks. Philippines and Indonesia are at the top with 75 to 78%, compared to the U.S., which is just over 50%, and that may have gone up a little bit. But you can just see that a lot of these, Brazil, Russia, India, Mexico, a lot of these markets that have all the growth are also very, very active on the social networks.
And have they got better broadband penetration, or just it's all done through mobile devices? Like
it's primarily mobile.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So, it's, I think in the U.S., it's, I don't know what statistics I saw. I know in India, most of it's mobile penetration. Yes. I think Indonesia is the same.
Okay.
And they just leapfrogged and didn't even, go to the landline networks. Yes. So, okay, mobile growth. And I don't know how to do this. It's like, it plays. I wonder if I can play it on here. It's not that important, but this actually walks through mobile subscriptions per 100 people, and it'll fill in if it actually works. Okay, so you can see how, it's just, from, I think it was Sweden back, in early 2000s that had the highest penetration in the world. And then now you've seen that, there's several countries that actually have, people have more than one mobile phone. And just filled in a matter of a decade. And again, this is what's driving so much potential, for startups, and for investors, and just for economic development in general. And then along with this mobile growth, we've also seen incredible growth in data, which creates the need for data analytics or the potential around data analytics too, and what we can do with this data. So Cisco releases the study every few years, and you can see that they're projecting by 2016 10.8 exabytes per month of data being created on mobile devices alone. And we're just at around 1.3 right now, which is still a lot. And that's an exciting area for me. We keep hearing about big data, but then what's important is figuring out how to constructively use this data in different verticals, but it's all there, and it's ours for the using. So let's move into the three areas that I think are particularly interesting right now on a global scale, and one is financial services. Start with the U.S. Because we've had such an established banking system here, been very slow to innovate on online banking, on mobile banking. It's starting to happen. We're seeing banks finally figure out that they need to, have mobile apps and allow people to deposit checks, etc., without physically going to an ATM. But when I was with the New York City Investment Fund, we spent a lot of time with these large banks, and they were still they were still trying to figure out whether mobile was going to be big, and that was just 3 years ago. Now PayPal has been around, but PayPal is, I'd say, clunky, expensive, ripe to be disrupted. And I'm seeing a lot of startups here that are trying to do that. The problem is we're so fragmented in the U.S. in terms of financial services. Square has been doing well. More mobile phones are being shipped with near-field communications to do the contactless payments, but again, there hasn't been any kind of widespread adoption there. And then we're seeing little bits of innovation around mobile couponing and loyalty cards on mobile devices. But I do think the next few years, I feel that the banks are finally getting it. In this country, it's really the consumers that have been leading the businesses in terms of mobile, mobile potential. But they're getting there. Kenya is just an interesting case study around what can work with mobile payments, and they launched in 2007 by Safaricom, and what helped is that Safaricom is pretty much a monopoly there. So they mandated, or they actually had the ability to distribute or create this platform, whereas there is. We have several operators in the U.S. and in many countries, and so that was one of the keys on why it took off. And then the government was very supportive of and did not regulate it or actually created supportive legislation around M-Pesa. And we're seeing it started off as just being able to transfer money between people. I've been seeing different applications being built on the platform, savings applications, micro savings applications, where you can actually renew airtime or buy more airtime through the platform, and remittances too.
So this is connected to people's bills, cell phone bills, or?
Yeah, the cell phone bills, right. And then I actually have a video later if you want to see it. I didn't include it, but it walks through what people, how people interact with these kiosks and can send money to each other. It's over $4 billion of M-money transactions in Kenya, which is 13% of the entire GDP has gone through M-Pesa. And the interesting thing is the average value is $24. So it's these micro transactions that are happening. But just think of what is now possible that wasn't before from a business perspective there. And when I was last in Kenya and I was interviewing people who are using M-Pesa and the kiosks, they just couldn't believe that in the U.S. nothing like that existed, because they just think that the U.S. is so much more innovative.
The joke is that here in Redwood City, they redid downtown and they built a new parking meters. They accept mobile payments, except nobody's able to make mobile payments.
Right.
How hysterical.
Visionary.
Well, and it's also when you're traveling to these regions and you have good cell phone coverage and good broadband coverage on mobile networks, and you're in the middle of New York or here and it's spotty. So, and then Japan, at the other end of the spectrum, so they've really innovated around the and how much?
Yeah, no, you've got plenty of time.
Okay. Just
We'll
let me know if
we'll go to quarter past, so it's
okay,
full hour.
all right. And they've really pioneered the use on the near-field communication, so the contactless payments. The reason it's worked so well is that they rolled it out at the subway, train entrances. So it's high volume, quick transactions that it works for. The government played a significant role there, and that's a theme we've seen. I mean, even though there is in the U.S. we believe in this free market system. In a lot of these other countries, what's really helped adoption is regulation or support. And contactless payments are 40% faster than credit cards and 55% faster than cash. So just the velocity and what's possible if you start transforming it, creating more revenue for businesses. If retail outlets can start using it. And this average value of the transaction is only $9. So you can see they're using it for these small transactions, trying to roll it out on a broader scale beyond just transportation. And in the U.S., they're really trying to push it with retailers, and we'll see if it catches on or not. But you need to have these readers, which is
they
expensive.
have them in all of the 7-Elevens, all of the little convenience stores everywhere have them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
In Japan.
Yeah. Okay, commerce. So Amazon started here in '94. The U.S. was at the forefront of online commerce. Have a very high average spend here, $1,000. And you guys you've been here all week and know that how much innovation is happening in the commerce space. I think tablet is going to be very interesting because it's made for browsing and purchasing and has a better interface than a smaller form factor as the smartphones. So this is an area that I'm really looking at actively investing in. And the U.S. commerce market's going to continue to grow. I mean, people have money here. It's going to be continue to be a big market. I think there needs to be a lot more innovation on purchasing on mobile platforms. It's still on the mobile sites you have to go through like 10 or 15 screens before you can actually check out. So what Amazon did with the one-click purchase. So I think all of that will evolve on the mobile side. And then the social element. I think it's still to be determined whether that creates more friction or actually helps in commerce. And there's just so much experimentation happening right now. So China, I mean, huge, growing middle class there. E-commerce spending expected to increase from $75 billion to $315 billion in just 5 years. Their average spend is expected to be almost the same as what the U.S. is right now. And their large, commerce site, there are 48,000 items sold every minute right now. And part of this is because there are not as many kind of bricks and mortar outlets, or they're harder to get to, outside of the main cities. And the traffic is an impediment too. So people just find it more comfortable to purchase online. And this is like a cultural difference, and this will exist in different. I'm just using China as an example, but these are things to think about. If they're the most likely in the world to check product recommendations on social networking sites, so they don't trust independent parties. They're going to trust their friends or certain folks that have made recommendations versus independent sites. And a lot of this spend is on mobile devices. So Brazil is another market where there's a huge growing middle class, and so an area, a region that I'm very interested in, especially as it relates to commerce. And they've been innovating around, there's the mobile commerce and online commerce, but also kind of in-store experiences, which I think are just starting to come to the U.S. a little bit more. But these interactive dressing rooms, and where people can take pictures and send off texts and photos to social networks, and then the retailers are actually collecting all this data. And so, I'm not saying this is broadly implemented there, but there's just, it's a very, social, people like to shop there, and I think there's still that very much bricks and mortar desire to be out shopping versus China, and so they're innovating around that in-store experience, which the U.S. is trying to do too, is kind of bridge that, compete against just a pure online presence. And mobile. The last bullet says that iMusica takes 2 months to sell online and what it does in 1 day in mobile. So, if you're looking at just the online out-of-store experience, mobile is where people are buying there. Let's talk about healthcare. This aging population in a lot of these regions in the world creates opportunity around healthcare, and we're seeing that in the U.S., and this is another area, investment area that I am looking at very closely. By 2050, 20% of the U.S. population will be above the age of 65. And so there's a need for at-home monitoring systems, and there's been more focus on preventative health care of not, in the U.S. we've been primarily focused on just treating, once there's a problem and not enough on the prevention. But with this kind of aging population and the health challenges that can come with it, there's more focus on how do we, predict what's going to, what we're susceptible to in terms of disease later on in life. And then that's created this opportunity around quantified self, where, we have the Fitbits. Are you familiar with the Fitbits that track, how many steps you take, and you can input all this data about you. You can sequence, there's the DNA typing that 23andMe is doing, and collect all that data and then figure out what you personally need to do to take care of yourself. And then there's the mobile. More doctors are using mobile devices because we're seeing, a generation of doctors that grew up with technology, which wasn't the case before. So it's much easier to even create applications that doctors and hospitals use. And so they're remote, like ECGs. There's a picture of that, of this X-ray app on a mobile phone. And so I think there's a lot in the U.S. that's going to happen in this space over the coming years. We're just in the beginning here. India is very interesting because they have so few doctors there compared to the population. So they have pioneered this mobile, these mobile vans that go around treating people, but have these kind of mobile devices and that are low cost. That can travel, and like pacemakers and X-ray machines, these low-cost infant warmers, these these incubators that actually cost like a tenth of what they do in the U.S. but are just as effective. I looked at a dial-a-doctor service, which could be implemented here in the U.S. as healthcare costs go up, right? Where there's you pay by phone call, or you take have a subscription of being able to contact doctors remotely. They've also done a lot around paperless records. So I track India very closely because I think some of these innovations happening there can be transferred over to the U.S. And then Nigeria and Ghana, when I was at Omidyar, I looked at this company called Pedigree, which is targeting counterfeit pharmaceuticals by having codes that, and you have to partner with pharmaceutical companies, but they're codes on the medications that then you scan into your phone, and it'll tell you immediately whether it's a counterfeit or not. And this is a huge problem in emerging markets. And as more and more pharmaceuticals are manufactured in these emerging markets, it's going to become more of a global problem. So they're building this huge pharmaceutical database and they're actually talking to companies in the U.S. now to implement it here. So, the conclusion here is it's just, and I'm talking to a very international audience. I don't really need to tell you this, but it's really about not focusing too much on a particular region, or thinking about how technologies, can be applied in different regions in different ways. So you can take one technology and just think about all the potential markets that it could be applied. I think we're just at the beginning of this, and I really would like to see more cross-border collaboration amongst startups, amongst investors, and I think any startup that isn't paying attention to global markets is not going to realize their full potential. And it's harder to do because there are cultural differences, but it's the kind of growth that we're seeing around the world, and the startups that are able to take advantage of that have just done so much better and multiplied their revenue streams and potential. So